Greetings, 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 everyone, and welcome to Create Yourself Imagery, Intimacy, Innovation, a place where people from all walks of life and various backgrounds come to share their transformative personal and professional stories of restoration, confidence, clarity, and empowerment. I'm Joyce Kiles, your global speaker and life and leadership thriving coach. And if you are ready to transition, transform, and thrive, this is indeed the podcast for you. I am so pleased to welcome our guest for this week. I have known her for close to 2 decades now. As I'm sitting and thinking about introducing her, like we have known each other for quite a while. So I am really, really excited to interview her and share this podcast space. We met at a time when she was one of my trainers in a project that centered around domestic violence and abuse. And I learned a lot being part of that program and just connecting with her specifically. And even as we were talking before the podcast, I have learned that she is quite the quiet storm. So I am truly, truly excited to be able to share who she is, what she does, and just jump into the podcast. So I'm going to read a bit of her bio, and I'm going to tell you on the front end that she gave me a short version because I know that there's a lot more that she could have shared, and hopefully we will take a deeper dive into more about her and what she's done and what she's doing. But I'm going to read what she shared with me. So, Adrienne N. Spires is CEO of Lapis Analytic Consulting, a Public Voices Fellow on Domestic Violence and Economic Security with the OpEd Project, an author of Roaring Resilience, Finding Grit in the Lion's Den. So I love the fact that this is something new as we're going to be talking about Create Yourself. She is an author. So I am looking forward to her talking about Roaring Resilience, Finding Grit in the Lion's Den. Adrienne, originally from Illinois, and I learned that she and I are actually from the same area in Illinois. She holds an MS in Education Administration from Eastern Illinois University. With over 2 decades of experience, her career has been dedicated to nonprofit work promoting racial, economic, and gender equality. Her efforts primarily target preventing and addressing interpersonal violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, mental health issues, and children's mental health. Beyond her professional achievements, Adrienne proudly identifies herself as a wife, a mother, and grandmother, highlighting the personal roles that bring her joy and fulfillment. Her commitment to education and social change is evident through her proactive engagement in organizing, networking, and collaborating with various stakeholders and individuals. So, without further ado, I present to some and introduce to others none other than Adrienne N. Spires. So, welcome to the show, Adrienne.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I really appreciate being on your show, and I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have you. So we're just going to jump right on into the conversation. I did share a little bit of course, of your background and the work that you're doing, but I would like for you to share a bit more about how you came into your advocacy work and the pivot that you've made to create yourself with your author's journey.
Sure. I was working in education and then, children's mental health services. And then I realized that working in children's mental health, I was working with teen moms. And I realized I was the facilitator for their group support groups. And I had to facilitate this curriculum, Heart to Heart. It was a curriculum to work with teen moms to help them to ensure or to introduce parental ways so their children would not be victims of child sexual abuse. And during that 12-week curriculum, I learned that a lot of those young mothers were victims of child sexual abuse themselves and were victims of intimate partner violence. And so that really made me think about, oh my God, this is way more um, prevalent in our community and with young people, not just with adults. And then I also thought about my personal experience as well. And then after that, I found myself working for the mental health board, and then I ended up working for the rape crisis center. And then I found myself on this path working in gender-based violence. And there is like a intersection in all these different traumatic experiences. And especially working with Black women, seeing that most of us are number one in a lot of these adverse categories. And then I decided to write my story, being a survivor of domestic violence.
Wow. So I do know and remember you sharing some of that with us when we initially met, but just hearing you talk about it now and sharing the journey and understanding that there are real intersections in all of this and not just what it looks like in totality, but more specifically what it looks like for us as Black women, because you're absolutely right. We tend to be number one and number two in
Mm-hmm.
so many of these spaces. And I think that's a really important thing to lift up as we have conversations around it, that there is there's the numbers that exist holistically, and then there's this section where it's about us as Black women, and it's really devastating. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that you took it upon yourself to learn more and to be more involved and see it in different dynamics, and that you were working with those young mothers. That's a work that I greatly admire and having the capacity to do. So thank you for showing up for us, showing up for them, and doing the work that you're doing. And then taking your experiences and crafting those into a book. So that's a good segue for me to dive into my next question, which is, tell us a bit about your book.
Yes. So, Roaring Resilience, Finding Grit in the Lion's Den. It is my memoir about my journey, um, being a victim, and then I was able to pivot to be a survivor. I do want everyone to know that victims of intimate partner violence and domestic violence, and there's a difference. Some people don't understand that there's a difference. Intimate partner violence is, you're in this relationship, a romantic relationship, an intimate relationship with someone, and then there's some abuse. Domestic violence, it takes place in a home or within a family. So those are the difference. Um, but I want people to know that either or, we tend to have victim survivors or people that experience either or both. We tend to have a life before we experience any of that type of abuse. And
Right.
so my book, I talk about who I was before I entered into this romantic relationship with my abuser, who was my ex-husband, who was my high school sweetheart. And I show who I was growing up on the south side of Chicago. Um, you know, uh, it started 1619 West Garfield at my grandmother's house, or my family used to meet on the weekends. We hanging out. This was my paternal grandmother's home, my father's mother with his siblings and my cousins and aunts and uncles, and then showing just growing up in Inglewood, um, growing up, just having a good time in the hood, and also letting people know the hood back then in the 70s and the 80s. It had a suburban feel, but it had a little more character to it. It's a little more
Hmm.
charisma.
That's
Um,
right. That's right.
and just it was such a good experience being in an all Black community. I've never been skinny. As you and I talked right before we, got on your podcast, I was like, I had to start back, working out. And I was like, I've never been skinny, I'm from the south side of Chicago, but I was never one of those skinny girls from the south side of Chicago. I was a thick girl from the south side. But always being proud of who I was, never having to worry about my melanated skin or my physique or the texture of my hair, which has helped me be quite confident in, who I am as a Black woman and at that time as a Black girl. And also just this book is an opportunity for me to share how I was with my ex-husband who I met in high school, and I outlined that in the book, and how it started out as a nice romance, a girl in the, in high school in the hood and hanging out with the guy from high school, and how he was a gentleman, and how unfortunately the gentleness went away, and how I, ended up on this trajectory of abuse, and how it was quite difficult for me to get out. I had to have a plan. And hopefully, people will understand when they read the book that it's much easier for people to pose a question, um, to say, why she just didn't leave. And sometimes it's a rhetorical question. And wanting people, I really would like for people to say what prevented her from leaving. I think people need to pose those questions when it comes to um, people, especially women and girls who experience some type of abuse, why they didn't leave, what prevented them from leaving.
Wow. So as you're sitting and talking and sharing everything, Adrienne, one of the things that really stands out to me with what you've shared, outside of really thinking about, you gave the exact address where you lived. I live 10 minutes away. I live 10 minutes from you in Chicago, based on that address. Um, but what came to mind is what you shared about people asking rhetorically or just, direct outright, why didn't she leave? And you sharing your story and talking about how difficult it was to leave. And I love the fact that you provided a different question by what prevented her from leaving. People tend to be very judgmental in assuming that the person stayed in this relationship because they wanted to. And you and I both know that it's a mindset shift
Mm-hmm.
that has to happen. And when you have gone through abuse and trauma, and you have a person who makes it difficult, not just physically, but emotionally. There's an emotional attachment and emotional trauma that takes place. And so it makes it difficult to just pick up and go, as unfortunately many folks in our society believe that you just are able to do. There are a lot of barriers. So when we talk about what prevented her from leaving, I have a presentation that I give called I Left Now What, and it talks a lot about, okay, I got out of this, but now what do I do with,
Mm-hmm.
because of all of the emotional trauma that goes along with dealing with an intimate partner, or just going through domestic abuse. And as you said, whether it's one, both, either, it is traumatic. It's a mental trauma that you have to work through as well. So I love that you have taken your experiences and put them in a book for people to read and to glean from and find strength in. And I love that you mentioned your transition from victim to survivor, and talking about who you were beforehand. Adrienne, I think that is so important, um, that people remember, before I went through this experience, or before I experienced these things, or before I witnessed these things, who was I? And
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm so glad that you shared some of the positives in that.
Yeah, I think about also the fact that I was this young, vibrant girl, and young, vibrant young lady, and this mother, and I'm just thinking about life, thinking about being a team member, being a teammate, with the father of my children, who then became my husband.
Mhm.
How are we going to be a team, right? And how are we going to grow together? How are we going to grow our family? I was just always quite optimistic. I always felt like, we can live this life, we can move forward. I always had a spirit of, as a go-getter. I'm just gonna work, and we're gonna, get it done. And once
Right.
upon a time, he had the same mentality that I did, and unfortunately, it just started dwindling,
Mhm.
and he no longer had that. And then, he became quite selfish and the abuse. And so one of the things, I want people to also understand is that, you know, when you mentioned about leaving, um, I don't know if a lot of people understand that when women are in domestic violence situations, when they want to leave, it's not as easy as just getting up and leaving. It normally takes someone in an abused situation 7 times, 7 attempts before they leave. However, when they attempt to leave, that's the most dangerous. And sometimes
Right.
they are murdered. And if they don't have
Right.
a really good plan, a solid plan, a solid support system that can help ensure that they do not have to go back, that's when it's the most dangerous. And I had 5 kids at the age of 26. I was 25, soon to turn 26. I had my fourth pregnancy, I had twins. And so I also had to think about the embarrassment that I had. I didn't want to ask my parents or anyone if I could bring myself and 5 children into their home or
Mhm.
sleep on a couch. What type of couch will hold 6 people? I didn't have my college degree at that time. And so we have to be very mindful of how we view women that are abused. And I know that there are men that are abused as well. I'm just talking about from my experience as a young woman, a young Black woman, and a young mother at the time. So just being mindful of that. Um, and so I'm really sympathetic, empathetic, and always highly concerned about Black women and Black girls because that's my experience. And knowing that this world, our community, and some systems are not, quite a few systems are not very supportive of Black women, even when we're not victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. They're just not very supportive of us in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for lifting up all the pieces, because the statistics show that it brings support to all of what you just shared. So sometimes there's this pushback in society, certain conversations I know that I have been a part of where it is unbelievable. And when I say unbelievable, I mean it just seems like it's unbelievable to, you know, folks that I'm in conversation with.
Hmm.
Uh, the true struggle of what it means to be a Black woman in society, just the struggle of that all its own. And then when you add on things like abuse and trauma and what those statistics mean for us, there are a lot of layers to us. There are a lot of barriers,
Hmm.
um, and that we have to work on and work through and overcome and still show up as our beautiful selves,
Yes,
regardless to what is going on around us. And there's an expectation that we're able to do it.
absolutely. Absolutely. And we need to do it with a smile, right?
Oh, yeah, let us not forget that.
And we need to be gracious, and we need to show up and still make sure that we're professional. There's so many expectations for us. And not to say that we're not respectful, not to say that we're not intellectual, not to say that we don't have we do not embody or encompass all those things and then some. At the same time, we are human, and we should be afforded all those other supports that everyone else are afforded. Um, and those are the
Absolutely.
concerns that I do have. And when I was working with the teen moms, they were not afforded that. And that was something that made me work even harder to make sure that I provided that to them, myself and my team, my colleague friends that I was working with, and made sure that we advocated on their behalf that that program that they afforded them all of the human dignity that they needed and not just for grant purposes only.
Right, right. I love that. Thank you. I love that so much. And, it's always my goal and my desire that I show up in that way and those that I am uh, in community with, my colleagues, my sisters. Um, I know that they are doing all that they can to show up
Mm-hmm.
in that same way. That is one of the reasons that you and I connected and have stayed connected as long as we have. We do share that same desire and passion to uplift us and to move us into better spaces holistically. So
Yes.
I just applaud you, commend you for the work that you've done, the work that you are doing, and the work that you will do, because we've talked a bit about that too. And I'm going to go to that in just a moment. I do want to ask you, because I think it's a good segue as we're talking about uplifting, what has been some of the most gratifying parts about what you've done with your work, with your business, being a fellow. I think that's an important part to lift up, and certainly with writing this book. So if you would just share with us some of the gratifying parts of it all, and to part, what have you found to be some of the more disheartening parts of this journey?
Um, so for me, being a Black woman, being able to vocalize and verbalize my experience, and to share my concerns and my experience, and to be able to speak for other, Black women that do not have that opportunity. And not to say that I could speak for the masses, but for who I know and what I have seen. So I could speak from a personal standpoint, a professional standpoint. Um, as far as my book go, I want people to also know that um, my journey was it was a challenging journey. It took me a long time to get out of that abusive situation because my life was um, in jeopardy for a very long time. And when my ex-husband told me that he was going to murder me, I believed him. The abuse was severe. I detail that in the book as well. Um, I had to figure out ways to, you know, protect myself, protect my children. I was thinking, like, who's going to raise my children if I was to, um, take matters into my own hands? One of the things I was thinking, how can I commit a homicide and make it look like a suicide? It was the grace of
Mm,
God that I did not
mm,
murder that man, you know. And
yes.
I talk about that in the book, like thinking, oh, I will be able to get off because if I was to murder him, oh, I have order protections but I was so green behind the ears that I didn't know that the system did not um respect or protect women or women who are being abused if they had order protections, if there was some history of abuse. That is not the case for victims of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. So that was something that I wanted to most definitely outline. And that goes back to the question, what prevented um, that woman or women from leaving those abusive
Right,
situations. And
right.
so I wanted to share that and detail that as well. Um, and as far as being a public voice fellow, I like the fact that the OpEd project has partnered with California Blue Shield Foundation. Well, Blue Shield Foundation of California, they have partnered to host this fellowship focusing on domestic violence and economic insecurity to help reshape dialogue and stigma around domestic violence victims, and showing that economic insecurity is a reason why some victims do not leave. Um, if you don't have a place to go, it's challenging to leave, regardless of how much you want to leave, regardless how much abuse is a is a main factor.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
and I
Absolutely.
think people don't think about that. People, you could tell people to leave, but if you reside somewhere and the rent is $1,000 or $1,500, and you need 1 month's rent, 1 month's security, or you need to make 3 times the amount of the rent, that's very challenging for some people to leave.
Right.
Also taking a look at just the economy as a whole, looking at wage gaps, especially for women of color, Black women, and other women. Um, so this is one thing I do appreciate, and I'm just excited about being a member of the fellowship, looking at ways to have these conversations in so many ways, especially now, the climate that we're in, the political climate. People could say that they don't believe in politics and they don't want to talk about politics, but politics impacts every inch of our lives, and more so now than ever.
Absolutely. You don't have to be a politician or have a background in policy work in order to appreciate what you just said in terms of how much politics plays a role in our lives.
Hmm.
I don't follow a lot of, the stock market, for instance, but I have watched over the last few weeks how it has risen and fallen, and reached, all these levels based on decisions that have been made by the administration, our current administration,
Hmm.
and that's the way of the world of all administrations. But just thinking about it right now and where we are and the up and down, and I the record lows, and everyone is all up in arms when they're talking about it from, again, like from the stock market perspective. And I'm not a person who is, in politics and any of that, but I know how it affects me and impacts me when I go to the grocery store, when I
Absolutely.
go to get gas, when I seek out opportunities for contracts. I see it showing up and being denied opportunities in real time
Hmm.
because, well, right now we're not sure, so we need to hold on to our current funding. And, we just don't know with what's happening right now with the administration, and things keep changing. And so, so absolutely to your point, politics does play a role in our lives, whether we want to admit it or not, whether we like it or not. Um,
Hmm.
and it's not always, necessarily always a bad thing at times. Sometimes, it can be for our good. Um, but nonetheless, it is what it is, as my father used to say. It just is what it is. So we have to work through the ebbs and flows of it all, the peaks and valleys, and show up the best that we can for ourselves, for our families. And certainly, if you are going through any type of abuse or trauma at all, it makes it difficult when you're looking to leave. I believe it is the National Network to End Domestic Violence. I'm almost 100% positive that this particular statistic has come from, but 99%, and I remember when it used to be a little lower, it was still in the
Hmm.
90s, but they are sharing that 99% of all those who've gone through domestic violence has gone through some sort of economic abuse as well.
Hmm.
And I talk with people in corporate America, most recently about a month ago. And one of the gentlemen that I was talking to said, you know what? I had no idea about economic abuse. Like I just never thought about
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
being a thing. I remember a newscaster sharing that same thing with me. And can you come on the air and talk about that? Because I didn't know that economic abuse was an issue. When I reached out to you, it was to talk about domestic violence. And as soon as I lifted that, because I wanted to talk about some of the barriers and that being one of the biggest, because if I'm hungry, if I don't have a place to lay my head,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I am not the breadwinner, or even if I am the person who brings in the majority of the income, but it is being controlled by another individual, those things matter. And as you said very early on, having a plan and being able to execute that plan is key. Having a support system is helpful. Some people don't have that. So it's important that we have conversations that include, like what we're talking about right now, and that we show people that there are ways to do it, strategic ways to do it. It's not easy all the time,
No.
but that it can be done, that we are living, breathing examples of what it's like to survive and to thrive.
Absolutely. And one of my first op-eds that I wrote as a fellow was No Fault of Their Own, Why the Government Needs to Support Domestic Violence Survivors. And I talked about the financial component, talked about
Hmm.
how the US government, has supported different organizations, different systems, but why it's important for domestic violence victim survivors to receive support and to support the Violence Against Women's Act or the different OVW office and to help fund shelters, help fund these different organizations that provide services and support for women and children. And now look, now I think that article was posted um January 29th. Yeah. And and now look what's happening. All the federal freezes, the funding for the different
Right.
federal agencies. And we're hearing all these different stories about people that are being pushed out of this country, and they're using domestic violence as a reason why they need to get them out of here. They're using sexual assault as a reason to get them out of here. However, the funding for those organizations here in the United States that help with prevention and intervention and order protections and to provide supports to the victims, right? And their
Right.
children, the funding has been cut. So on one hand, they're using those stories and reasons why to justify why people need to be pushed out, but at the same time, the organizations that provide supports and services to the individuals that are the victims of
Hmm.
those atrocious experiences, all their funding have been frozen and they can't continue to provide the services and supports.
And that is one of the reasons why your voice and the work that you do and that you uplift with your voice, with your writing, with your book, with all the things. That's why we need women like you to continue on with the movement work, with the conversations, with advocacy, with action. We need it. And that's the only way that people will hear it and know it and recognize that, okay, someone is fighting for us, someone else is sharing the voice and the concerns that I have. Because, to be honest, a lot of people are afraid to
Yeah.
talk. They're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to speak out. So they need outlets. They need voices. They need folks that are on the front line, behind the camera, as we talked about before the podcast.
Yes, yes.
But all of it matters, So whether you're out front in plain view of everyone, or if you're behind the camera and behind the pen, behind the paper, being online and showing up, whatever that looks like, thank you for your work. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being a part. I will continue to do my part in the places and spaces where I can show up best. Um, I loved having my nonprofit for the years that I had it, but I also recognized that it was time for me to dissolve it and move and operate in a different space to
Mm-hmm.
be a voice and to help people. And so I'm continuing to do that in the ways that work best for me in this season of my life to help and support. So I think that's a good way for me to segue to asking you if you have any events coming up, anything that you want to share about what you're currently working on, and of course, how can we purchase the book?
Yes. Thank you so much. So I have a couple of things. So I will be the keynote speaker for, well, first let me say how you can purchase the book. So you can purchase the book off of my website, which is Lapis analyticsconsulting.com. And it's also available on Amazon, but I prefer for you to purchase it off of my website. But if you purchase it off of Amazon, you also can purchase it um, the through Kindle. The purchase to Kindle, so that's great. You also can. I will be speaking at the domestic violence I'm sorry, Domestic Violence Homeless Service Coalition Summit, which is going to be July 10th. I will be the keynote speaker. So I am looking forward to that. That is scheduled for July 10th. And the theme of that summit is Surviving to Thriving. And that is going to be held at the California Endowment in LA. And I'm also working on a national campaign looking at the trajectory from intimate partner violence to Black femicide, relating to Black women and Black girls. So that will be rolling out in July. And so um, Joyce and her organization will be a part of that, and she
Mhm.
will be able to share some information about that. So I am looking forward to everyone, you know, um, hearing and seeing more of the things that I will be doing to support Black women and Black girls, how we are being impacted by intimate partner violence, and what we can do to, as a call to action, and how we can really get a handle on this and be of support to our community.
All right, that sounds wonderful to me. And yes, I look forward to talking more with you about the campaign and how, Joyce Kyle's Consulting will play a role in being supportive of that effort. Congratulations to you on your upcoming keynote address. And I love that the theme is surviving to thriving because that is definitely my personal and professional theme song, if you will. So I love talking about not just our experiences, but how we have transitioned and transformed our lives into a space and place of thriving and how to thrive abundantly. I think that is so important. So
Yes.
congratulations to you on that. And as I always share, the information, on how to connect with you and purchase the book and all the things to keep up with you, I will have it listed so that those who are listening to the podcast, all your bio and all of your Connect Me information is located on all the platforms where the podcast is being heard. So I will wrap up by two questions. One, what main points or encouraging words would you have for our audience or resources? Anything that you would like for them to take away from our Create Yourself conversation? And then, what are the best ways to connect with you?
Can you repeat the first one more time?
Oh, sure. So the first part of the question is just sharing any main points of encouraging words, any resources, any takeaways that you would like to leave with our audience. And then afterwards, just share a little bit about the best ways to get in touch with you.
Yes, support victim survivors of domestic violence and organizations that support them. And that could be with direct support of organizations, Black-led, Black-focused organizations that assist them through donations, volunteering, or any way that those organizations ask for support, and believe victims of domestic violence, and always think about not why they did not leave, but what prevented them from leaving. And you can contact me through my email address, lapisanalyticsconsulting.com.
All right. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I love it. I love it. What prevented her from leaving? Let us move away from saying, why didn't she leave? And think about what prevented her from leaving. I love that. And supporting organizations, especially now, I just want to echo that sentiment right now, especially with everything that is going on in our climate. Regardless, do it any and all the time, whether you can give of your time, your talents, to volunteer. Donations financially are always appreciated. But right now in this time, in this space, it is especially important. So I hope that those who listen today will take heed, will reach out to local organizations and find out the ways and spaces and places that they can help. And of course, going to share about the book in terms of, you can go to Amazon and, and purchase it there and go to Kindle if that's your thing. We certainly support that and uplift that. But I do strongly encourage, and I share this because I'm an author as well. And when you purchase directly from us as authors, those proceeds come, more of that comes to us versus a third party. I'll say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us the opportunity to, send you a note or send you a special gift or sign, autograph the book. And, you know, we are business owners. So our work that we share that's on our websites, it matters uh, when you purchase directly from us and give us an opportunity to, get those analytics to say that someone has been to our site and looked at our work and wanted to purchase directly from us. So I'm definitely uplifting. Please go to her website and learn more about what she's doing. Stay connected to Adrienne, purchase several books and give them to others in your circle that will benefit from it. I have a copy and I can tell you it's a good book. I'm almost done reading. Um, and so I'm not saying it just because you are my guest. I am thrilled though to have it and to be able to share and talk about it professionally and personally. So thank you for your time, for your talents. Thank you for sharing vulnerable pieces of yourself. I pray that it gives freedom and peace and perspective to all who listen and listen to the podcast today, and certainly who read your book in the future.
Thank you so much. Oh, can I say one thing? I didn't
Absolutely.
say this. I really do want to place emphasis on also it's faith versus fury. That is a focus of the book as well. It's my faith versus
Mm.
fury. So I should have said that in the beginning, but that is something that I had to wrestle with.
Okay, then you know what? That is a good way then for us to close this out because I don't want you to give away too much, but I do like that is a really good, strong focal point to consider. So I'm glad that you mentioned that before we closed out. I encourage everyone to please make sure that you purchase it, that you share it, that you talk about it, that you reach out to Adrienne if you need her to come and speak and share. She is a dynamic speaker, so you will do yourselves and those whom you serve a real service by connecting with her for that. So, with that, I want to thank you, Adrienne, for being my guest today. And I want to thank you, the listening audience, for tuning in today because I could not do this without your support. So, until next time, go forward and create the life you desire and deserve. And remember that you can do that at any age. Let's continue to transition, transform, and thrive together. Until next time, talk to you soon.